The year is 2024, and on November 21st, Blizzard is releasing Fresh Classic, which means everyone has a decision to make, and a big one at that. Which class to play this time around? Maybe you're the kind of person who always picks the same class, perhaps you're looking for something different. Then again, it could be your first foray into the world of vanilla Warcraft. Whatever it may be, the first release of Classic in 2019 was a while ago now, so I wanted to go over each class and let you know what you're getting yourself into. I'll be rating the classes on a few different things, such as leveling. Since there's no experience boost in this version of the game, you're going to be spending a lot of time leveling, as in multiple in-game days played, so this is kind of important to like. PvE, as in how the class will do in raid content, how in demand will their different specs be, and so on. PvP, considering both smaller scale and larger scale PvP, and farming gold, because this is vanilla. If you want to do basically anything at endgame, you're going to need gold, and some classes just have a much easier time than others. I'll also use a 1 to 5 star system just to help out, where 5 is very good, 4 above average, 3 average, 2 below average, 1 poor. Also worth a mention is Blizzard have just made a few announcements which are going to be really impactful and may indeed completely change your choice of class. First up to know is mail between your own characters on the same account will be instant. This isn't really related to anything, but it's just nice to have. Second is the debuff and buff cap removal. This benefits a number of classes that we'll talk about when we get onto them. Don't expect this to change which classes are top on the DPS meters though. This was tried in Season of Mastery many years ago. It didn't really alter much in the meta. And biggest of all, this won't be happening at launch though, but it will eventually. Blizzard plan to add dual specialization to Anniversary Realms, meaning having a PvP and PvE spec, a farm spec and a normal spec, and not being stuck as a healer without dropping 100 gold in between raid are all back on the menu. And of course, Anniversary Realms are progressive, so eventually you'll have TBC with dual spec too, and hardcore with dual spec for that matter as well. So with all that said, and with 9 unique classes to cover, let's make a start on this. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev is a platform that will equip you with the skills to forge a career in back-end development through both interactive lessons as well as the learning. It aims to keep this process more interactive and goal-driven by bringing in features such as experience achievements and leaderboards to keep you motivated to progress. Boot.dev offers the tools to get fully on board with the Python and Go programming languages. It achieves this through hands-on learning, where you're going to be writing tons of your own code, so you can really get a grasp of the fundamentals from the basics you need to know onto more advanced concepts. On top of that, the content is free to view and watch in guest mode, and there's even a 30-day no questions asked refund policy. So even if you're just interested in seeing how Boot works and want to know a little bit more before you know if it's for you, you can definitely do that. If it sounds interesting at all, it could be the start of a career, so why not check them out? You can click the link in the description box and use my code WILLE to get 25% off your first month, or even your entire first year if you choose the annual plan. Many thanks to Boot.dev for the sponsor today. Let's get on back to WoW. We'll begin with the Priest. We'll do the cloth armor types first and then ascend upwards. The class that wields both light and shadow in Classic has big strengths and some noticeable weaknesses too. I've always found Priests relatively fast and extremely efficient whilst leveling, and the key thing is that they barely ever need to stop and drink. Whenever I level a Priest, I get to a new level where I can buy food and water. I'll go and buy a few stacks, and I won't even have used them all before I've reached the next tier of food and water. They are very reliant on a wand though, so you could consider going enchanting early till you get a wand, or stopping by a capital city to buy one quite early. The first quests that offer wands will take a bit of time to get to. You get Shadow Form at level 40, which really powers you up and adds to your class fantasy, and I think Priest is a great pick for leveling, albeit quite simple and straightforward in terms of how they play. PvE is a story between the Priest's two identities. They are the best healer in vanilla overall for me, without a doubt. They simply have their largest toolkit of heals, and your average raid will be playing multiple Priests between Holy and Discipline. Both specs work just fine, by the way. Discipline's a bit more for raids that want to push performance, as they'll want the power infusion talent for their casters though. Shadow Priest is one of the biggest winners of the debuff cap removal, as to function on a very basic level they need 3 debuffs, and previously we only had 16 total. This is a very big part of what made them hard to justify bringing. Now without the debuff cap they can work, but don't expect them to be doing crazy damage or anything. In In fact, Shadow's still really not that great of a DPS, and they still have extreme mana problems, but they can now buff Shadow vulnerability to help out Warlocks, and Vampiric Embrace healing can be nice on some fights. Shadow Priest won't be in super high demand, but you won't feel bad about bringing one to your raid now. And just for a point of reference, here's the top 10% of damage dealers for each class in Phase 1 and Phase 2 of 2019 Classic. I couldn't find a snapshot just of Phase 1 unfortunately, but this is to give you a rough idea of how things look back then. Moving on though, PvP for Priest. The healer identity continues to be very strong and versatile. They have an offensive and defensive magical dispel, their racial spell bonuses, mana burn, fear, shields, and so on. If you want to play a healer just in general, you can't go wrong with the Priest in vanilla in any area of content. Shadow is also much better in PvP, and is definitely one of the strongest small scale or skirmish type classes in the game, due to their mix of damage over time and self-sustain. They're not as good in larger scale PvP due to lacking an AoE threat, but their utility is still nice to have. Overall, Priest great for PvP. Farming on the Priest is okay, you remain a highly efficient spec as Shadow, which can certainly hold down a farming spot on PvP realms, but it's probably just going to be gathering and you don't have access to anything exceptional. Next up, Mage. Mage, the original hero class before Death Knight was put in the game. If you want to be among the best at quite literally everything, Mage can probably do it. It's for good reason that basically every single Fresh server has a Mage hitting 60 first by themselves. This will happen on the Fresh server coming up too, I'm sure. Mages uniquely have access to AoE farming, allowing them to gather up a bunch of mobs and to just blizzard them down, though this involves much more concentration than regular play and isn't really for everyone. But even if you're just playing normally, you're sitting a good 30 yards away, frostbolting at basically zero risk. Mages are a fast and consistent pick for leveling. In PvE scenarios, mages are the best overall caster damage dealer in vanilla, and the one you'll be stacking the most of. You start in Molten Core and Blackwing Lure playing Frost as, well, a bunch of stuff is immune to fire, but in the later stages of Classic you can go fire and start enjoying those massive fireball crits into huge ignite dots. Mages are amazing in dungeons too, more so than other classes because they just have so many AoE spells, and there is no AoE cap whatsoever in vanilla, so the more you pull, the better the mage gets. In PvP, mages are a very strong solo and small scale PvPer due to their polymorph freezes and counterspell, which allows them to have control over the battlefield. In large scale PvP, mages are the best class in the game by such a big margin, nothing even gets close. Your ability to freeze and slow enemies from a distance can instantly turn the tide of battle or allow you to engage on an enemy. And guess what? They're the best gold farmers too, again by an absolute mile. Nothing compares to them. The caveat is if you are willing to learn how to do it, of course. Mages can boost other players and AoE gold farm to get tons of resources in a way no other class can. On seasonal servers, Blizzard did put in some anti-boost mechanics in dungeons such as Ulthrak, Mara, Strat Undead, and so on, where after a while mobs will become immune to slows and their roots and gain movement speed. They haven't mentioned this in regard to Fresh whatsoever, so I think mages will be able to boost and stuff, but I don't know 100%. Even without AoEing though, mages are still good at gold farming. On top of that, mages get their own food and water, they get portals they can sell to other players, they can teleport around the world. This class is just overpowered in every single way possible. Their key issues being a very high dependence on mana, they're squishy when undergeared, and they can only be a DPS, but in my opinion, they've got a lot of upsides to them. Warlock next, Classic's primary shadow caster, and what was my main for the 2019 Classic release. So how are they? Well, they're a great leveler as a whole. You can go a drain tank build where you face tank enemies and use drain life and a succubus as your primary demon. Warlock have got a bunch of great class quests where they pick up their demons as well as several armor pieces, and you get a free mount at 40, which is very nice on a Fresh because having enough gold by level 40 can be kind of hard to do. They have very little downtime when leveling, and they can summon, which you already know people are going to be waiting for you to do at the dungeon. In PvE, I can definitely speak from first-hand experience here, they are kind of middle of the pack, and their main use in raids is pretty much utility. In raid, you're going to have at least 2 Warlocks for Curse of Recklessness and Elements, and with the debuff cap gone, 3-4 Curse of Shadows as well will also be nice. You do have a lack of hit chance on your talents though, which means you can't hit cap for ages. And when your Shadow Bolt does hit and it crits, you can over aggro quite easily, especially on Horde. With the debuff cap gone, you can put up Corruption and play the Shadow Mastery Ruin spec all the time, which means you can at least be taking advantage of one of your damage over time effects. effects. I can tell you right now, unfortunately, there is basically a 0% chance any affliction build beats destruction. In vanilla, dots just aren't very good. There's no haste effects for them to scale with, and they don't crit. Still, they're a simple class to play in PvE. In fact, they tend to be underplayed, so I think it'll be very easy to find a raid spot if you're a Warlock. They're a middle of the pack DPS. They do improve over time with the expansion, but they very much remain in that position. In PvP, Warlocks are good at small and solo scale PvP with their Demon and Healthstone. Again, speaking from experience, I don't think I could recommend playing an Alliance Warlock on a PvP server again. I swear, half the Horde are undead, the other half are warriors, the other half are shaman, and the other half have PvP trinkets that can remove fear. For larger scale PvP, they're not quite as good as you can't get in range for fear, and you're just spamming damage over time effects and curses which can be dispelled. I think when people talk Warlocks in PvP, they really zone in on the Soul Link spec, which is great for 1v1s, but not so good in other scenarios as it lacks damage. Still, we have dual spec these days, so in between raids or whatever else it is you're doing, you can pop on the Soul Link spec when you're in the open world. Warlock also has a very long recovery time after death, with needing to resummon their Demon and Healthstone and so on. For farming gold, in my opinion, Warlock was a great class to play. It was amazing at challenging solo farms, such as the Eye of Shadow down in Dark Whisper Gorge, which you'll be able to do straight away once you're 60, and eventually Dire Maul can come out and you can start doing jump runs with mining for arcane crystals. You can't really AoE like a mage can, but if you can fear something or kite it, you can wear it down with your damage over time effects. I think if you don't want to sell services to other players as you would on a mage or a hunter, that Warlock is one of the stronger farmers in the game. Next up, we have the Druid, World of Warcraft shapeshifter, offering a bit of everything and the chance to play any role in the game. Well, that's the theory anyway. I've always been a big fan of Druid's leveling, and I like the progression of getting the different forms. You start off as a novice where you're just using spells, then you have a quest to learn bear form at 10, and you get cat form at 20 from your trainer. These are very satisfying power spikes and nice milestones to achieve. You get travel form at 30, which is often better than mounting up over short distances and great to have, and your efficiency between defeating enemies in cat, going to human, healing and repeating is great. When you're leveling as a druid, specifically as feral, you didn't need dual spec either. You could flex between tank or DPS for dungeons, no problem. I will say the druids feel as though they fall off a bit power wise towards the late game, but they're still overall a positive experience. PvE for druids can mean a lot of different things, but the main theme here is the more effort you put in, the more rewards you're going to get out of it. Resto druids are fine, and in a vanilla raid setting, you've always wanted one of them. With the buff cap gone, you can now use heal over time effects, but healing in classic tends to be quite whack-a-mole style, so I think aside from a few fights with the raiders taking consistent damage, this isn't really going to change that much. Innovating combat res are nice to have, but again, stuff just tends to die so fast that they often don't get as much use as they can in future expansions. In vanilla, druids also don't have a traditional resurrection ability. Feral can be good, but it's a very high effort spec, with you power shifting to min-max your energy gains, farming manual crowd pummelers in mmorpg to DPS optimally, and you can go to all that trouble and you just won't be beating a warrior. Tanking's quite a similar story. It's got good threat per second, but again, it's not as good as other picks. I find the people who roll feral druid time and again are the absolute fanatics of the spec and the class, and more power to you for that. Boomkin is the one I haven't talked about yet, so let's just say it's not very good. And whenever I say this, there's always the one guy saying he's top 5 in his groups when he plays Boomkin on the DPS, but he must be top 5 in a dungeon run or something, because this spec has more problems than the druid has rolls. It has extreme mana issues, poor hit chance, a lot of straight up useless talents in the balance tree, competition on caster gear. Even with the debuff cap removed, I'm genuinely not sure if Moonfire would be a DPS gain. Again, damage over time effects are not very good in classic, and it costs a ton of mana, which you already don't have. Druids do fare better in PvP though, where their mix of mobility and sustain can come in as a powerful combination. In smaller scale PvP, any of the druid specs that can deal damage can hold their own versus most other classes, and druids are always super annoying to fight versus as melee because of how much they can reset fights and spam roots. In larger scale PvP, they aren't as good as other picks because they don't offer enough utility from range, but they're okay. Where druids excel in particular for PvP though is flag carrying in Warsong Gulch. Being able to move with a flag while shifting into different forms makes them really difficult to lock down, and without a doubt the best class in the game at this role. For farming, I'd say druids are above average, specifically on gathering professions, where they can take advantage of their innate mobility in the open world. It really is just gathering though for druids where they excel, and it's rare to see a druid that doesn't have some variation of mining or herbalism to support their endgame gold spending. Rogue are next, and as always they're sure to be a popular pick on PvP servers due to their ability to choose every fight, but they're good in vanilla for so many more reasons than just that. I'd say they're an okay leveler as a whole. In fact, some of the fastest 1 to 60 runs have been done by a rogue, but I just find them kind of awkward to deal with during this part of the game. You're always in this strange spot with a rogue leveling where you need to build combo points, but by the time you have enough combo points to do something, the mob is nearly dead, or you use slice and dice and end up wasting half its duration. There are ambush type subtlety builds which work too that I personally find a lot more interesting, but you really need to find a good dagger to make that work. I do like their class quests, however, they add a ton of flavour to the experience, and once you are done with leveling, you are in for a good time at endgame. Rogues are up there among the top damage dealers in vanilla, and with great CC and interrupts for dungeons, they are good, consistent damage in any PvE setting. They can absolutely be top DPS on fights where you can have full uptime on Blade Flurry, but will ultimately lose out to warriors long term. Rogues also have powerful cooldowns as combat and are a great pick overall, and with 40 people per raid, you can more or less always take a few more good damage dealers. Rogues have nothing short of a legendary status in PvP and vanilla. With a ton of burst control and a very high skill cap, rogues are popular for a reason. In duels or small scale PvP, the rogue's impact can be absolutely devastating, and this is where they really shine. Larger scale PvP, you're not so good, you can't really get in range to do anything, and if you open on someone and are seen, you are just way too squishy to live for long. And of course on PvP servers, you could just be the guy wandering around one-shotting lobies trying to instigate some world PvP. You already know there's going to be people that'll be doing that, let's not pretend they won't. Or you could be the guy who stands next to a ledge and distracts people off of it. It's just classic rogue things, isn't it? For rogues, I'd say they're pretty average at farming. The upside is you can go BRD and pickpocket mobs, which is consistent gold, but not terribly exciting to do, or indeed fast for that matter. Being a melee only class, they have less options for gold farming in general, and would probably have to go one gathering profession if being considered a main. The Horde exclusive Shaman is a versatile pick in Classic that can fulfill more roles than you typically see it do in later expansions. Oftentimes you'll be starting your leveling journey as enhancement, doing a whole lot of auto attacking. You have great class quests for your totems. Okay, the water one's a bit long, but it's still fun to do. You have different weapon imbuements to try out, and when you hit 30, you of course get Wind Fury. You get Ghost Wolf at level 20 for a big movement speed buff outdoors, and Shamans are absolutely viable at tanking lower to mid-level dungeons. Higher level content has been done with enhancement tanks, but they kind of fall off pretty hard in terms of survivability and not having a taunt. Elemental can be good at level 40 plus, it really needs a bunch of talent points to make it start working. It does great damage, although it uses a lot of mana to do so, and I feel as though Shaman falls off a bit towards the latter stages of leveling. In PvE they have a bunch of specs, and some very contrasting ones at that. Most of the time you will see Shamans as restoration, they will be chain heal spamming, and they're going to be dropping Wind Fury for melee. On top of that, restoration in itself is a very strong healer, so this is a good pick. Elemental isn't actually that bad, though certain mobs in Molten Core will be immune to your nature damage spells, and there is also a lack of debuff support for nature damage as well. All the same, you can put out big crits with Elemental Mastery, and if a fight is short enough, you'll do somewhat respectably. You're not going to be beating mages, rogues or warriors, but no one else really does either, so there you go. Finally, we have Enhancement, which is again not very good if I'm being honest. A lot of their talents that you have to pick up kind of do nothing. There is space for Stormstrike with the debuff cap gone, but it can get used up by any random source of nature damage such as weapon procs. There's a lot of auto-attacking gameplay on the enhancement and hoping for Wind Fury RNG. If you're being brought along to a raid, you're going to be scrolling down to see yourself on the meters. In PvP, restoration is again pretty good, can be easily locked down due to lack of instant cast abilities, but they can offer good support through their totems. Enhancement is the slot machine spec. You purge off a Clothy's buffs, you run up to them, you swing, and you just pray that that Wind Fury procs. If you can get in range of people without dying, that is. Elemental is the big PvP spec for Shaman, and it's an absolute terror. They're tanky, they've got massive burst potential, they've got good off heals, and they've got that good standard Shaman utility. A Tauren War Stomp into Elemental Mastery, Chain Lightning Earthshock doesn't have counterplay for most classes in the game, and will remove the majority of your health bar. And yes, Elemental Mastery will still crit with 2 spells even without spell batching in the game. Blizzard specifically removed this interaction during TBC. In terms of farming, nothing too special for the Shaman for gold making, it'll be the case where you're taking a gathering profession and doing what you can. Next up is Hunter. With a pet at the side, the Hunter excels in a number of different aspects in the game. One of those is most definitely leveling. Starting off before level 10, you don't have a pet quite yet and do have to suffer a bit, but once you get your pet, it's like you have your own personal tanking service all the rest of the way to 60. Just remember to go and train a new rank of Growl every 10 levels from your pet trainer. Hunters have a ton of class flavor with pet training, ammo, pet food, class quests, and a minimum attack range. People treat Hunter like it's a noob class, but honestly they have a lot more things to track than many other classes in the game do. They are a great leveler, but you're kind of restricted on your playstyle, where your auto shot and pet are going to be doing most of the work. In PvE, Hunters are great in dungeon and leveling content, and have a strong start in the endgame during Molten Core and Blackwing Lair, but as the expansion progresses, their scaling with gear is poor, meaning you really peak at the start of the endgame. Your pets are also honestly just really bad in raids. They don't scale with your gear and have no AoE damage protection, and healers are going to prioritize them last as well. Hunter's key role in raiding is really pulling for tanks so that they can get mobs in position, and this isn't pulling with misdirection or anything like that doesn't exist. It's just warrior tanks, which are going to be your tanks most of the time by the way, don't have a ranged ability to pull mobs with, so it's easier if the Hunter does it. This can be quite a bit of responsibility, especially when a bad pull can chain mobs together, or even bosses depending which raid you're doing. On the upside, at least if a ranged weapon drops, you are top priority with little competition, and your tier sets are all pretty good as well. I'm a big fan of the Hunter in PvP and Classic, but they definitely have some weaknesses too. In smaller scale battles or in the open world, they can be very good due to their range and consistent damage. Your pet can also be super annoying for casters, as it will consistently melee them and knock their casts back. And of course, seeing an aim shot basically one-shot somebody will never not be satisfying. In larger scale PvP, if you can cut off doorways with a frost trap, it can be absolutely devastating, especially with the entrapment talent, which can root people repeatedly with no diminishing return. Hunters are great in big battles due to their range and ability to snipe people who overstep. Their main weakness is of course the dead zone, which is an area where they can't attack with melee or ranged attacks, and only being able to trap outside of combat in vanilla. Hunters are an amazing farming class too. With their pet and range, they can easily take on elite enemies and come out on top. Their most famous farming classic, however, is definitely in Dire Maw North. Here they can sell cleared IDs for people who want to gather their world buffs, they can sell items from the tribute chest at the end, or you just go enchanting and disenchant everything and you'll still make some great gold. Keep in mind though, Dire Maw won't be available until phase 2, so until then your options will be more limited. Next we have the Alliance exclusive Paladin, wielder of the Holy Light and Smiter of Evil. What can we expect from them? For leveling, Paladin is kind of similar to Priest in some ways, in that it gets most of its tools that it's going to be using to level with super early on, and then they kind of just roll with it for the rest of the journey to 60, and that's going to involve a whole lot of auto-attacking. Paladin leveling is the kind of experience where you want something to watch on your second monitor basically the whole time. It's not particularly fast, but it is efficient. You also get a free mount at level 40 and have some great class quests too. For PvE, Paladin is typically driven towards one playstyle where they excel, and that will be for healing. The Illumination talent gives Paladins all of their mana back when a heal crits, which along with world buffs just gets really overpowered really fast. Even when you have a little bit of gear, you just never go ever again. They also of course have amazing utility with Salvation for a 30% threat reduction, Blessing of Kings, Might, Wisdom, Freedom, and Protection. Paladin's other specs though tend to be less popular. Despite Protection being a tank spec, they don't have a Taunt ability, which can be really bad, because if anyone over aggroes, you kind of just hope they have an aggro drop ability or you can get the mob back on you. Basically, if you don't have a taunt, so many things can go wrong. Also, they have a bit of a lack of threat generation through their normal gameplay versus non-undead. In dungeons with loads of undead, such as Strat Undead or Dire Maw West for example though, Paladin tanks are actually very strong, and their exorcism is almost like a mini taunt. There is also a playstyle for tanking that was discovered where players just spam Greater Blessing of Kings, which is a holy spell and therefore its threat generation scales with Righteous Fury. This generates a good amount of threat and does make tanking more more of an option. Finally is Retribution. I think Ret is one of people's favourite class fantasies, but at endgame in PvE for vanilla, your best stat is not going to be an in-game one, it's going to be instead your real-life social skills stat, because if people like having you around and you're helpful, it's sure to score you a raid spot. Because unfortunately, no one has ever really said, man, we need a rep pally here. But at least with no debuff cap, you can put up Seal of the Crusader and not get flamed for it. And with 40-player raids, you should be able to find a spot in different groups, it's just that people don't really go looking for them. In PvP, the Paladin does fare better though, both as ret and holy. Paladins are tanky with their high armor and resistance auras, which can make them very annoying to deal with. Hammer of Justice on a short cooldown has to be one of the best crowd control effects in the game, and they can deal some pretty surprising burst damage. You can also go a Reckoning Spec down the protection tree and stack up that talent before finding some poor unfortunate Clothy and blasting them with a bunch of autos in a single swing, which will pretty much one-shot anyone. Paladins are also good in both smaller and large-scale engagements with their utility, and unlike PvE, in PvP you have so many different buttons to press that they can be very effective. Paladins also have unique ways to farm thanks to talents such as Consecration and Blessing of Sanctuary. Assembling the perfect AoE farming set with items like Skullflame Shield, Demon Forge Breastplate, Essence of Pure Flame and all the other random reflect damage items in my opinion is super fun to do and makes for a unique playstyle. Paladins, unlike mages, are also going to be face tanking when they're doing AoE pulls, and you can really test the limits of pushing exactly how many different mobs you can pull at one time. Outside of AoE farming, Paladins would be average, but I'd say if you're having this class as your pick, then you should definitely look into AoE farming, and with dual spec it's going to be even easier than ever before. The last but not least is the Warrior, which as per usual you should expect to be the most popular pick in vanilla WoW, though it will be some time before your Warrior comes online as their leveling experience is notoriously poor. It feels early game like you're role-playing an NPC and you're just auto-attacking down mob after mob, but then you start getting abilities such as Execute, Whirlwind, Sweeping Strikes and Mortal Strike, and you really begin to come online and get a taste of the power that the Warrior will have at endgame. Warrior also has amazing options for weapons through the Whirlwind Axe quest, as well as great class quests in general. I would even put Warriors to average for leveling if we had world buffs in the game right from the start, but it's a fresh realm so there aren't going to be any world buffs dropping for some time. And the reason people go to the trouble of leveling Warriors is for the end game. So Warrior is the best overall DPS class in vanilla, and that is by a pretty huge margin. As this is fresh vanilla though, you are definitely incentivized to go human or orc for their respective weapon racial skills, which will greatly impact your ability to hit boss level enemies. Warrior's rage resource simply scales the best with gear, as the more damage they do, the more rage they get, which they can then spend on doing more damage. A Prebis Warrior in Phase 1 with consumes and world buffs would be capable of beating most other classes in full Naxxramas Bis with world buffs. They really are just that good. Of course, this means Warrior is always overplayed and competition for gear will be fierce. Don't expect to get your Savage Gladiator's Chain or Hand of Justice without either making your own group or forming some kind of pact with guildies to run it until you all get them. In a raid situation, it's similar. You can easily have a dozen or so Warriors and every single one of them wants the exact same items. Though vanilla does have 40-player raiding, and you can really always take more Warrior DPS, so there is going to be space in the raid, but it can just be tough to get gear. On top of that, Warriors are the best tank in vanilla with their Prot Fury build. This maximizes their threat generation at the cost of some survivability, and threat is just more important than any other tanking stat in vanilla. You could take 0 damage, if you can't hold threat, it doesn't matter. And the scarcity of loot in vanilla is why so many Warriors, and just, well, classes in general for that matter, will be ranking in Phase 2. And when it comes to ranking, and more specifically PvP, Warriors are overall good. The thing is, they need support to be good, just as they do in raids. They also need a good deal of gear to really start being threatening to other players. An undergeared Warrior versus casters will just get blown up before they have the chance to do anything. So definitely a weaker class solo for PvP, but when you gear up and have support, they become truly unstoppable. So it goes without saying that Warriors are pretty poor at gold farming, and your options will be selling tanking services or gathering. Warriors also tend to be quite expensive with their crafted items early on, such such as your Devilsaur or Lionheart Helm. Warrior is definitely one of those classes where I'd consider having an alt who is a bit better suited to farming gold. And that is it, a brief breakdown of every single class in vanilla. At the end of the day, there's always more to say about each aspect of every class than I have time to do, and of course you can very well clear the content with just about any combination of specs. It's just people will often look for the easiest way to do things, which is why the meta picks become more popular. My first videos back in 2019 were also on the subject of reviewing vanilla's classes, but nowadays I had a week between the announcement and release and I just didn't have time to fully redo them. If I had more time I would consider that, because those original videos are, let's just say, of a different quality to what I'm doing now. Still, I hope this gives you a bit more information on the classes and vanilla, and hopefully an idea of what you'll be locking in on the 21st. Of course, we already know too that this is a vanilla server and will be progressive into TBC, but with it being a year or so away, there'll be plenty of time to level up, and ultimately to decide whether you'll be taking that class across the Dark Portal or be re-rolling to something else. I could make content about how the vanilla classes fare heading on into TBC, so if that sounds interesting, you'll have to let me know below. Anyways, good luck on Fresh, have fun, and as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I shall see you all in the next one very soon.